Hello, and welcome to Two Crones and a Microphone. I am Sally.
I am Betty,
And I'm
and,
Nicole Zanzerella.
and Nicole is our guest today. We're so excited to talk to her.
We're cultural midwives. Our podcast is about shared wisdom through storytelling and research from us as experienced crones and friends. We offer experience and spiritual practices for body, mind, emotion, and spirit to meaningfully connect with our beautiful earth, to walk your talk and act from your heart's desire instead of fear. Today, on podcast number 53, Claiming Your Crown, Spiritual Wisdom in Midlife with Nicole Zanzerella. We welcome you to podcast 53.
Thank you very much.
So, I just wanted to let you all know that we did have some wonderful feedback this past couple of weeks, but the one that I liked the most was the fact that people really enjoy the relaxed atmosphere, the kitchen table atmosphere that we have while they're getting some really valuable information. So that was my favorite. Um, and of course, as we said, today we are welcoming our guest, Nicole, and she'll be sharing some stories with us. And over the span of 25 years, Nicole has been sharing stories in classical and contemporary theater and independent film. She is an award-winning audiobook narrator and also narrates audio description of film and television for the blind and low vision community. Nicole will tell you that her favorite stories feature strong yet vulnerable, sometimes messy, badass women with a heart of gold.
Indeed. Just like you all.
So, Nicole, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what exactly do you do to record these books, say, for instance?
Yes, that is the majority of what I do right now is recording audiobooks and audio description in my little magic box that I am currently in. Um, I get to tell stories for a living, trying to, even though we're in our age of technology, trying to invoke the idea of just telling stories around the fire, verbally, um, through the medium of audiobooks, which has become, that also started out as something to help and aid the blind and low vision community decades and decades ago. And it has turned into a medium that is incredibly mainstream, that many people enjoy. And so yeah, I get to tell stories for a living. I prep books and read stories and then tell them as best I can in this contraption of a microphone that hopefully then lands in other people's ears and gives them moments of escape or knowledge or fun and enjoyment or a place to process things and identify with other people they might not have otherwise identified with and things like that.
So, I've always wanted to know this about audiobooks, and I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
So, you have to do all the characters, right? So, you have to do the badass guy and the vulnerable woman, and
When we are the only narrator on a project, then yes, there are times where we have multicast books where you might have different voices in the form of something like a radio play. That's becoming a more popular way of telling these stories through audiobooks. But there are still a lot of single or sometimes dual point of view where maybe you'll have two narrators. So I would be doing
Oh.
the female, sounding point of view, and some chapters might alternate where there's the male point of view if the book is written that way. So there are some different ways of doing it, but when you are the narrator, the solo narrator on a book, then yes, you are responsible for voices, characters, accents, the narrator of the story itself, the the point of view that the writer is writing from. And yeah, you do it all.
Wow.
Sometimes well, sometimes, it's a struggle. There are different there's so much room for so many of us in the audiobook industry because we all have different strengths and weaknesses. So there are some people who are amazing at any accent you could possibly imagine, and other people who just like to tell a straight story and don't go too far into characterizations and everything in between. And there's ears for all of that as well. There's listeners who like all different kinds of things too.
So you get to be all these amazing people.
I do get to do some really fun things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hence the badass woman, right?
Yes.
Those tend to be my favorite stories. People
I'm
that are
sure.
really finding their way, discovering who they truly are. Those are kind of like the heroine's journey. I do enjoy those stories the most, but it's fun to play all the characters in a small town in a cozy mystery, or all the detectives in a mystery thriller, or all the characters in a sci-fi fantasy world. You could play an elf, you can play a fairy, you can play an ogre. There's so many, and I'm lucky because I do get to bounce around in the different genres. I get to do nonfiction and talk about the brain. I get to, I get to do some romance. I get to, play an archaeologist, an underwater archaeologist in, the middle of a military thriller. So I have fun because I've always wanted to kind of do as much variety as I could.
I love it. Well, I will admit I love audiobooks because I think it's awesome to listen to them when you're doing things around the house. But I got hooked on audiobooks when I was spending a lot of time in rush hour traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to figure out a way to, and I think it was your mom who might have suggested the audiobooks, trying to figure out a way to change the fact that I felt like a lot of my life was disappearing just sitting in traffic, going to work and coming back from work. And so I got hooked on books. I like literally probably listened to almost every book that even mildly piqued my interest in our library, and then had to start ordering books from outside the library to other branches. So I personally am grateful for someone like you because
Me too.
you helped me feel like my time was productive. I was learning things. I was listening to things. I think it's a great thing that you do.
On behalf of all audiobook narrators everywhere, I thank you. And that's such a great way of, we think about it now that it started out as a service and it's become such a mainstream, almost form of entertainment. The idea, though, that it helped you reclaim your time and feeling like it was productive and not wasted. That I love that. I love knowing that that's an extra bonus.
So I just have a caveat with that, though.
Yes.
One of the first books I ever listened to was Outlander, right?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
driving along. I was coming from upper New York State into Pennsylvania. All of a sudden, I'm at the Tappan Zee Bridge. I'm like, oh my God, totally missed the exit off to 84, which was a ways back. So I had to call my husband and said, wow, traffic was so bad I couldn't get over. I didn't dare tell him I was listening to an audiobook. But that was a good lesson for me, like pay more attention. But I got so sucked into it.
Well, the voice of Davina Porter will do that to anyone, I think.
I love that you know who narrated that book.
Yeah.
I venture to say that I think now everybody does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. And I believe she's coming out of retirement to do the last book. So that's what I've heard. Yes. So I guess our next question is, how did you get involved with the audiobooks?
I've always been interested in, I keep going back to sharing stories because I think, honestly, I found my way to acting before that because I was looking for ways to process my own emotions, I think, and diving into other people's stories in that way. And when I was doing that and pursuing work in the theater and film and those kinds of things, there was a very dear friend of ours at the time. Um, and she was one of the first people I knew that was doing audiobooks, and she would every Christmas as a little funny Christmas gag, she would send us a little snippet of the most outrageous or outlandish thing she had to say that year. Sometimes she was reading textbooks. Sometimes, it could have been very off kilter romance type stuff. And she would just send this little snippet as a happy holidays. And when I would hear her do that, I would just think, oh, this is something I think I could really do. I think this is something I would really enjoy doing. But it was a very new thing at the time, and she was pioneering her own road. It wasn't like, hey, how do you do this? Like, she was on her journey with it. And so it was just always in the back of my head. And when I moved from New York to Los Angeles in pursuit of more things like film and television, we had other friends that were just diving. It was becoming just a little more mainstream at that time, where it was out there that this was something that could be done. And I got to meet some wonderful people at a place called Dion Audio, who became mentors to me and gave me my first job. And the moment I stepped foot in that studio, I knew I was home. And that was, I think, even more than any of the other work I was doing at the time. It felt like that was the place I was meant to be. And then audio description happened, and that tuned it up even more. So they're two very different pieces of a similar puzzle, but I feel like between the two, I really, really enjoy. Like, this was everything I think I had been looking for, but didn't know it was what I was looking for along the journey until it happened.
It might be an unfair question and you don't have to answer it. But of all of the books and things you've done, do you have a favorite?
I don't know that I can answer that. I have a few that will stick out and stand out. There are some that I love because they've taught me something I didn't know, and they would not be things you would expect. And there are some that I love because they're just so well written, and others that were just fun because I could dive in and do something I didn't normally do. But to name one, it's kind of like it's naming children. It's naming favorite children, and I don't think that's necessarily fair to the authors either. But there are one of my most favorite characters that I get to play, though, is like a very big, overweight, almost retired cop in California who trains. She's like the partner of the young female cop of the story. That is why I voice it. But he is like my favorite. They call him Dunkin' Donuts because his name is Duncan Pavone, but he's always got donuts and he always wants to eat. And I love voicing him. Like, he's just getting to kind of play that character, which I would never get to do that. So he's one of my favorite characters when you ask questions like that. But there have been a few books over the years that have been incredibly special. But also it's really, what you as listeners like to hear as well. So yes, we have our favorites, and you all have yours.
True.
What a sweet answer. Really.
Yeah.
That's one of the things
Yeah.
I appreciate about you, Nicole. What a sweet answer, right? In terms of just acknowledging the breadth of the work you do and the uniqueness of each of the projects and how valuable and important they all are, and all the different dimensions that they bring.
I'm not the only person that says this, but I think one of the reasons I think it's a collective feeling among the audiobook community, but I really believe, especially with the climate in general of things, everybody is unhappy, deeply unhappy about something going on right now, no matter who you are, what you think, what you believe, where you're at. Like, there's so much unrest in so many levels of the world. And I think we in the audiobook community specifically, I think even when we're in the studio with a book that maybe we're not loving, that's maybe like, oh, or we're having a hard time getting through or a hard time identifying with, but sharing stories will be the only thing, and listening, sharing the stories, but also listening to the stories. And I don't mean just listening to audiobooks, but hearing what people are saying and trying to understand where it is coming from, will be the only thing that can save us. And it has to be. And I'm not trying to pat audiobooks on the back in that it's sharing stories in any shape or form. And it's sharing stories when you go to grab a cup of coffee and say hi to the person behind the cash register, or online at the grocery store, or conversations like these, or, groups that we got to experience this weekend. And when we can really start to understand that we are not nearly as different as we think we are, inside, underneath anything that we look like, believe in, or think we have to be. And I think the only way to do that is to share stories, is to talk, is to, and to dig into yourself. Like, we have to also be able to understand in us where we're coming from with things and communicate in that way, which I also feel like we're not seeing enough of, or people aren't listening to themselves enough even sometimes to understand, well, why am I angry about this, or what makes me angry, or why do I think that person is so different? And so I think that's what gets us through any hard times we're having in the booth, or with pickups, or with an accent, or a character, or, oh gosh, even though we get to do this thing that we love so dearly and that it is a privilege to do, there are days when it's work and it's just a hard day, or a bad day, or, oh gosh, I can't stay one more moment in the closet, which is kind of what it feels like sometimes. But there is a much bigger purpose to it, at least I think. This is not a job you can do if you don't enjoy it. It's just, there's no reason to do it if you don't enjoy it. It's long, it's arduous, and it's not just opening a book and sitting there and reading all day. It's not that. And so I know for me, that gives me purpose, especially when I'm having a hard time. It just makes it all, not only is it something that I have pursued in my life and that's allowed me to live a creative life, but there is purpose in this work as well, in that regard.
And that's really a point of wisdom for everybody, because I hear you talking about how you really approach this from a spiritual perspective, and what you were just talking about stories of bringing us the ability to communicate with each other. That's really, to me, that's a spiritual perspective, and how you have combined what you do with what you are learning about yourself, but also seeing the world in a greater aspect and from a perspective that's really spiritual. And I think that that's unique. Not everybody is able to look at things that way. And how did you get started on your spiritual path? So right, there's that combination of your work, but that you've made your work kind of, spiritual as well. So how did those two things come together?
They came together a very long time ago, but they're still coming together. I feel like, and I'd like to just, before I answer that, I want to jump back and say that I understand that entertainment is entertainment, but I also think that, and there's times and places for just letting go, and I'm not sure this is the best term, but like zoning out. I was going to say numbing out, but because sometimes we use it for that, and that's also not great. But sometimes you need to just zone out and let go and be entertained. And maybe there isn't anything spiritual about it, although that in itself, of letting yourself go and relax, is also a spiritual practice. But I do think we sometimes miss the idea of the value in our entertainment. We are going to music and movies and television, and some of it's not our style, or some of it we might think is trashy, and some of it is trashy. I don't know if but there doesn't have to be a value on it. So yes, entertainment is entertainment, but I do think when we look to those things, whether we're looking to it as an escape or looking to it to learn something, that even on the most frivolous level of joy, that there can be a spirituality in that as well.
Mhm.
So I don't mean to overinflate the ego in any way, just that it does have a sense of even if you're just sharing a TV show with the person you love sitting next to you, that in and of itself can be a spiritual act. To answer your question, my grandparents were incredibly they were deeply religious. They were both my grandparents who helped to raise me. I grew up in a Catholic family. Went to Catholic school, even went to Catholic college, not necessarily by choice. It so happened it was. And so I grew up with a lot of religion around me. And also, though, learned at an early age that I had questions about what I was learning in that space. Um, I remember, I think it was grammar school where because we were being taught all of these things about how loving and protected, and if we were good, you had God's love and all this stuff. And then I also remember being taught all the things we were supposed to fear. And I couldn't put those things together and I remember asking the question, like, well, if it's all love and if God is all love and if this is all loving, then we shouldn't have to fear anything. And I remember, so I was raised with a lot of spirituality and religion around me. And I am kind of separating the two because I think also there can be a lot of extremes in both places where I think religion is not necessarily isn't always spiritual. And there's a lot of corporatization that can take place in those arenas as well, that takes away from the spiritual aspect of it. But I think religion in general, beliefs, faith is all important if you're in it for the right, if you can be in it for the reasons that feed you. And so I started to feel a little like I wasn't sure that was my world I wanted to stay in, especially as I got older. But also because, and well, my mom, who is a dear friend of the show, the podcast, and you ladies, um, she showed me that because she grew up in the same household that I then grew up in, as her parents, my grandparents. But before I think I even knew to ask my questions, I was watching her ask those questions and find her spirituality as an extension of what she learned and what she grew up with, but didn't necessarily feel like that was her place and tribe, so to speak, or community, so to speak, but then built on the ideas of that and found her own path and found her way to you and to the teachers that you've shared. And so I also learned watching her that you could find a spiritual path that was right for you. And I think I don't know when it was that I really started to examine what my spiritual life looked like. It's probably more recent than I'd like to admit, but because, for a long time you think you're just influenced by everything that goes on around you, by the people around you, your family, and trying to fit into that. But also, I still love going into a church. I have nothing against like the way I was raised or the religion. I still wear my medal. I still say prayers. I still use a lot of the same terms and believe in the same spiritual entities that I grew up with. and then some. And I don't think they're just found in a church by going every Sunday or just on holidays. Or I believe that it is a much wider net. I believe that church is anywhere that you are moved to the beauty of the world around you. I believe that church can be in a conversation. I believe that church can, in the same way, talking to the person who hands you your coffee or on the grocery line. So for me, it just became finding it in more places outside of the rules and the regulations that I grew up with. And that became important to me somehow. I wanted to bust out of that. I thought there was more than what I was learning. And now that I am where I am in this life, and it's something my partner and I talk about a lot, and he's got a tremendous amount of knowledge about many various religions. He's a student of knowledge in general. And I look back and I look at many of the religions of the world and many of the things that we call spiritual now, and people who may be channeling messages and who are in deep touch with their higher selves, or that are in touch with simply the divinity around them. The messages are all the same. So when we just take it all apart and break it all away, again, going back to all these things that kind of keep us so separate and divided, the deep message of it all is really the same. And so it was something, it took me a while to get there, and it took me a while to find it for myself, and I'm still finding it. I'm still looking within to find answers and clarity about things that I'm going through in my life, and things that maybe I'm still letting derail me from a long time ago, as a person that I no longer am, but still have residual effects of. I am constantly exploring and also constantly looking for it in the day to day. And that's been the thing that the last, I would say, 5 years of my life, and just what I've been going through, working through, experiencing, has been finding these divine and spiritual moments in the very little things, and in going outside in the morning and in the evening, and just connecting with myself and with what's around me. And that's where I'm finding my spirituality. That's been my path along. I don't know if I answered any part of
You
what you
did.
asked, but
You did, and I love it, because really, to summarize what you said, is part of the title of this podcast, which is Finding Spiritual Wisdom in Midlife.
Yeah.
And you so nicely talked about how you didn't leave behind where you were before, you just brought it forward. And I think, if we reflect on what we're doing here as Crones, and you as a queen, because you're in that area that we're now
I'm in the in
lovingly calling
between.
midlife, how has your spirituality grown and broadened and developed and become more enriched as you have gotten older and enter that place that we call midlife? And so I know it's really challenging. And I know you were just going to say something,
Yeah, no.
but we're at that place in the podcast where we're looking at, okay, how do we bring this down? And I feel like we just got started on our discussion.
I'm the
So,
talker.
well, but it's a good discussion.
Yeah.
So and I've been talking a lot too, so I'm going to step back and
Not at
say,
all.
Betty, you might have something you want to bring in as well.
Well, one of the things I want to say is that Nicole's mother is Fran. And we did interview Fran. So it might be interesting for you all to go back and listen to that interview with Fran, because there are a lot of similarities here, which is really good. Very, very, very interesting. And I'm so sorry that we're getting to the end of the podcast, because I'm learning so much. When we went through our queen stage, we didn't even know we were there. We were just going through it. You, on the other hand, are appearing to embrace it and doing exactly what that stage is supposed to do for you, what you're supposed to do in that stage, which, you're finding out who you are, what's going on inside of you, putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So by the time you reach your crondom, you're going to be pretty well set to enter into that stage. You have quite a while to go before you get there. But yeah, this has been really absolutely wonderful. I do have a quick question for you though. Like, is there something we didn't ask you that you wanted to say?
You asked, and it just came up as we're wrapping up. I will say that as I was hitting that midlife point, and I am still here, I was going through some things that a lot of people around me wanted to call a midlife crisis. We know that term, we hear it all the time. And I found a book, and if you don't mind me, I have to give credit where credit is due. It was a book by Brene Brown. And I want to say it was The Gift of Imperfection. I think it was that book, but it was one of her books where she talked about how we should not look at it as a midlife crisis. It is a midlife awakening.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
that changed everything for me. And that, if I could say anything, would be, whenever we are feeling like we are in any kind of crisis, it's usually because there's an awakening happening. And if we can be in touch with that level of understanding and then try to look at, well, what is it that needs that awakening, then we will find our way.
That is really beautiful. And we
Yeah.
have talked about Brene on the podcast before.
Okay.
Might be about a year ago that we brought her up because, the work that she's done and the things that she shares about vulnerability and the importance of vulnerability and really reframing things in a way that is positive and uplifting and not just finding a way to kind of bring ourselves down or be challenging or critical. She has done so much work, I think, for the world in
There is
looking at
such a
those kinds of
gold
things.
mine of information for ourselves in those places that we think are broken. And it's such a scary place to go, and it's a scary place to be, and most people don't even want to look. But if we can, it is a gold mine of information. It is not to be feared. It's hard, and it can be dark, and it can be scary, and it can hurt, but it is not a place to be feared because it is like where we actually break wide open.
I just had this vision of, breaking open like a Fabergé egg. And inside is the little treasure.
Absolutely.
So if you're willing to do that and willing to do the work, there's a wonderful, wonderful outcome for that. Wonderful. So it sounds like we should probably wrap this up, although I'd love to keep on going. And I'd like to remind everyone again about our 4 pillars that we base this podcast on. One, of course, is our touchstone is always Oceana, the way she lived her life and her teachings. And honestly, I think when we met her, we were probably all in our crondom, and she helped us to open up exactly what you're talking about, Nicole. We had to look at ourselves to be able to do the work. It was amazing. The second one would be our own collective life wisdom as Crones, of which we have a ton. And the guests that we interview, Nicole, you've been amazing. I have enjoyed this so, so very much. And of course, you, our listeners, we are creating a community. We ask you to go to the twocronesandamicrophone.com website, because that's where you can leave feedback on the podcast. Sally writes an amazing blog. We have a newsletter. So it helps you to keep on going with what we're talking about here. And I need to give a shout out to Linda, who's not here today. She's just returned from being overseas on a business trip. So you will see her in the next podcast that we'll be doing, which is Sally. What was the topic that we decided?
So spread the word. Feel free to leave a rating or share this episode with family and friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. leave a review on any of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, any sites to tell us about, this episode or other episodes, and tune in. The next podcast that we're going to do, podcast 54, we're going to dive into water, the element of water and the healing and challenging aspects of water. And so we don't have a title on that yet, I have to say, but we are going to be looking at water.
And on that note, I will say we're here to help you navigate the muddy waters of time as one of the aspects of water.
Okay. Anything you want to say, Nicole, before we end?
Just thank you so much for inviting me to talk and for thinking that anything I had to say was worth putting out there. I appreciate these discussions so much, and I hope we all get to talk about this kind of stuff together soon.
And Nicole, could you just mention your website? I know you have one.
Thank you. I do. It is Nicole, spelled without an E, thanks to mom and dad, Nicole, Zanzerella. I should probably spell that too. ZANZARELLA.com. And there's some information there about audiobooks and audio description and other things.
That's awesome. And we'll combine that in, Nicole. There'll be a face page with the interview that tells you a little bit about Nicole and some of the things that we're talking about. And I will be putting my head together with Nicole and maybe doing a blog around things that have to do with audiobooks that she wants us to dive into and share with each of you so that you can get just a little bit more into that world and explore what that would be like from her perspective. And as always, remember to walk in beauty. Kadishte. All is made beautiful. And thank you all for joining in. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, if you're enjoying Two Crones and a Microphone, please like this video and hit the subscribe button. Enjoy timeless wisdom from modern times, all served up by women in the know.